Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. With the recent death of Queen Elizabeth II, the challenges that King Charles III will face as a rising gen, even at age 73, are brought to light. How does he break out of the shadows? Someone so beloved and so prominent for so many decades. Many people in Britain have only known Her Majesty as the only monarch in all their lives. Our guest today tackles that subject on a wider scale. Dr. Jamie Weiner is a clinical psychologist with more than 40 years' experience in environments ranging from working with inmates at the Cook County jail system to hosting exclusive global VIP forums. His latest book, The Quest for Legitimacy, subtitled How Children of Prominent Families Discover Their Unique Place in the World, delivers a unique and eye-opening discussion of the rising generation's quest for self-determination in the shadow of a larger-than-life family. He was so intrigued with the experience that he initiated an ongoing qualitative research study called The Land of the Giants, which tackles the question of what is it like growing up in the shadows of other successes. He is also, along with his wife, Dr. Carolyn Friend, a co-founder of Inheriting Wisdom, a consultancy for high-net-worth families. He describes it as working on all the problems that exist behind the money. We're very pleased to welcome Dr. Jamie Weiner.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to this.
All right. And before we get into the book itself, I want to delve into a little bit of your own background because you share some of that with us. Your father was a prominent rabbi whose funeral drew a police escort and thousands of people. You've said some of your happiest times with the summer camp your father co-founded. And I love this quote. You say, even at 3 years old, I followed the song leader as he led songs for the entire camp, strumming my toy guitar. I thrived in being the center of attention. Odd question. Do you still play the guitar?
No, I don't play the guitar. I do sing occasionally, but I don't play the guitar.
I had to ask because you never know where those things will lead. So as time went on and you were dealing with this stuff yourself, when did your awareness of the problem grow to the point that you decided to write a book about it?
Well, I didn't decide to write a book until about 5 years ago. And like King Charles, I'm in my 70s. So about 5 years ago, I started doing a qualitative research study, interviewing rising gen family members from around the globe. And I think some of that came out of the experiences that I had growing up, but it really was a curiosity that came about from working with prominent families.
Well, you really do have people from all over the world on this. How did you select your subjects or get a hold of them? Because a lot of those people have flappers in between that control access to those folks.
I was very lucky, Roger. I have built a reputation through an organization called Family Firm Institute. So I knew a lot of the advisors of these families, and they helped me get access. And I was thrilled that the Rising Gen family members were excited to have the conversations.
Well, most people are flattered to be interviewed. I will say that, having interviewed a number of people, and it's fun. I mean, you get to talk about yourself and people get to answer that. So before I go on, one other thing, it was a nice touch. You put the acknowledgments at the front of the book instead of the back, so people might actually read it. I mean, people they close the book and they forget the acknowledgments. So nice touch.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, oh wow. Before we dive too deep into talking, let's acknowledge that this is really a first world problem for people who have wealth and stature in the community and whatnot. It's not much of a problem to do how you outshine your father if your father's a mill worker and you're don't have that same situation. But isn't there a connection between expectation, whether your parents are successful or not, and what they want you to do?
So, two things about that. One, if you grow up in a poor community, but your parent is the minister in that community or has a prominent role in that community, you still have that problem of having to look up to the successes of the generation that came before. And yeah, to some degree, all of us struggle to figure out how to make the best life we have, or we don't, and
Mhm.
that's problematic in a different way.
Do you have any kind of concept of how many children of prominent parents have these anxieties? Because you assume that some of them will just sail right on through with no problems.
I don't have a number, but I think it's a huge issue. And the part of how I get at that is by having had so many global conversations and about, as the book has been released, the comments that have started to come back about, oh yeah, this is great. You really understand what my life has been like.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And one of the first author interviews I did about a dozen years ago was with Amy Chua, the Tiger Mom lady. And I'm interested in the difference in different cultures. It seems to go across cultures, but is expressed in different ways.
Yeah, that was clearly the finding in my book. So I interviewed people in Istanbul, Indonesia. I interviewed people in Chicago. I interviewed people in Latin America. There are cultural differences, but the basic path that everybody took was very similar.
Right. And there's an interesting comment you made in here. It says rising gen members don't always know it's what they're looking for, or even that they are looking for it. Well, self-awareness, as you point out, has to be the biggest part of this.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit if we talk a little bit about King Charles,
Yeah.
because at 73 years old, I would assume King Charles knows something about the world.
Well, we hope so. We hope so indeed. I'm going to bounce around because there's so many bits and pieces. I take notes when I read, and I'm going back through them, and they're not as organized as well as they ought to be. But I do want to mention a line that really intrigued me. Psychology originated from a scientific attempt to use contemplation as a tool for insight. That's a new insight to me. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, it seems like it should be somewhat obvious, but when you think about the idea of putting somebody in a room for 50 minutes and
Hmm.
asking them to just talk about what comes up, that is in some ways very close to a contemplative practice, because it's really talking about in a verbal way. And normally when we do meditation, we do it with our eyes closed and it goes on in our head and we don't share it with anybody. But the connection is closer than we think it is.
Ah, that's Hey, well, thank you again. Again, my mind is opened every time I talk to a really good author like yourself. I get wonderful new bits and pieces in it as well. Um, let's talk a little bit about process because you outlined a whole multi-stage process of people becoming. Could we go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I was able to identify was in rising gen families, there are four steps. The first one is awareness. Could be as simple as the woman we knew who grew up in a family that did diamonds, and she learned how to count by counting diamonds. The second stage, you go out in the world a little bit, and all of a sudden you get some messages that are like your parents and some that are different. First, you come home and your parents go, cute. Then you go out a little bit further and you come home and your parents go, I'm not so sure that's cute. At some point, you go off and you enter into a period of exploration. At this point, you have your parents predominantly internalized. You have contact with them. Your exposure is the outside world. It's that opportunity to explore, to learn from a variety of situations, and to be able to have something to bring back. But that's also the time where you really begin to sort out who you are so that you begin to be able to move into the fourth phase and begin to have some agency and take ownership of your life.
It's interesting because you talk with a number of different people here and their different reactions. Some of them had an easier time of it. Some of them had real struggles on that. Do you feel that by interviewing them, you were doing a little counseling as well?
I don't know if I was doing counseling. I do know that I've been in contact with a lot of the people that we've interviewed. And for many of them, it was an experience. It wasn't just a moment of being interviewed that made them reflect on their lives.
Well, some of them were just immensely intriguing. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I, I, I want to flip to another aspect of that, of your life working at the Cook County Jail. This not seems like a standard moving up kind of thing. Um, and you put the line in here, most people have no reason to know the jail is the largest psychiatric hospital in a single site anywhere in the world. Maybe there would be fewer people inside if there were more of those on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a clear thing in Illinois that they closed a lot of the halfway houses for people with psychiatric problems. So it filled up the jails. So it was a move to economize that ended up costing more because now they had to go through the court systems as well. But
Yeah,
it was a fascinating experience to work
yeah.
there.
Wow. Were you ever afraid?
Yes. And I'm going to answer the question two ways. One, I was afraid because a couple times they would send me out to general population and have the belief that somehow because I was a psychologist, I could help calm down the wild beast.
Oh,
And the other thing is one night I had my tires slashed outside of the jail, and my mother and my wife refused. Nobody would come for me to pick me up. And so for a brief moment, it was a pretty terrifying experience.
the flip side of that, tell me about some of your successes, things you're proud of that you did there.
The thing I'm most proud of is I created a script and trained 30 mental health staff members in the jail to do an 8-session group. We got it up to doing 30 groups a week, and which is pretty unheard of, and even recorded a couple of the groups to be present to the American Psychological Association conference. So that was pretty unusual work that I did there.
Wow. Well, and tell me a little bit about the other thing that you are doing, advising people with, as you put it, the problems behind the money. How does this research help you in that direction?
So that started with my wife and I. My wife came from a business only family. There was a generation before that when their business fell apart, they stopped talking to each other and they stopped going to each other's funerals. So we really started with the intent that more important even than managing the money was figuring out how do you get people to have conversations with each other. And it turned out to be at least as challenging, if not more challenging, than working at the jail.
Yes.
And but when families can find common ground, there is more likelihood that they're going to develop plans that are going to be successful over time.
How does the fact that families are smaller these days influence that? Parents will have more resources per child at this point.
I do think it's different, but some of the families that I interviewed in the study are 250 or 450 years old.
Yeah.
One of the families that's 250 years old has 2,400 people that identify as having some connection to the family. They don't have family gatherings every year, but it's a pretty big group.
Wow.
And in smaller families with people living longer, the idea of transition between one generation and the next generation is a huge challenge.
Yeah, it is. What do you hope that when they people finish reading the book and they put it down, they take away with them from it?
There are three things that I hope people walk away with. One, I hope it breaks the isolation. Two, I hope it makes them feel that they could have some agency and control over their lives and identify what they do or want to do in connection to the family and the rest of the world. And three, I want them to see that they have the power to have impact and to make a difference.
That's wonderful. And you started to mention the reaction to the book. What kind of feedback are you getting at this point?
the feedback I'm getting is different depending on who it is.
Mm.
With advisors, they're saying to me, boy, this is a change in thinking. With parents, they're saying, maybe there's a different way to handle Rising Gen than what we've been doing. And the Rising Gen are coming back to me and saying that they didn't believe there was a path, and it's great to have a sense that somebody kind of got what's going on, which is what I really hoped for.
That is great. You have, I think, done a service to a big chunk of people out there. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to mention? Any of your websites or blogs or whatever you're involved with?
Yeah, I would love people to go to the website. We're going to start to do some book salons. We also have events that can be done. And we're going to and we're in the middle of organizing 1 year cohorts for families. The website is questforlegitimacy.com, and the book can be bought anywhere you can buy books.
Abs- Absolutely. Well, you've been generous with your time and I think helpful to society. Thank you so much. Again, our guest this morning is Dr. Jamie Weiner, and the book is entitled The Quest for Legitimacy: How Children of Prominent Families Discover Their Unique Place in the World. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.